You step through the doors with nothing but a set of dusting cloths and a mop, your hopes set on a simple paycheck to get by. The marble floors, the sparkling chandeliers, the grand staircase, everything around you screams wealth, status, and power. But for you, it's just another job. Or is it? What if that one seemingly ordinary job turned out to be the turning point in your entire life? What if that very mansion, where you spent your days cleaning and scrubbing, became the place where your dreams came true? Stay with me, because this is not your typical rags to riches story. This is about a woman who started with nothing but ambition and ended up with everything, including the keys to the mansion itself. So, how did this happen? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how someone could go from being hired as a maid to owning the mansion itself. I know you're curious, and that's exactly why you clicked on this video. Something about this story is pulling you in. Maybe you're wondering how this could even be possible, or perhaps you're intrigued by the idea of ordinary people achieving the extraordinary. You've probably seen stories like this before, stories where the underdog wins, where the seemingly powerless rise up to take control of their own destiny. But let me assure you, this one is different. There's something more here, something deeper that you'll uncover as the story unfolds. And I want you to stick with me until the very end. Trust me, the payoff is worth it. If you're thinking that you already know how this story will go, think again. I'm about to take you on a journey that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about fate, fortune, and power. Let me introduce you to Emily, our unlikely protagonist. At first glance, Emily was just like any other young woman trying to make a living. She had dreams, sure, but they were the kinds of dreams most people have. You know, the ones, dreams of getting by, of finding something stable, of making enough to pay rent and buy groceries without stress. Emily wasn't looking for a fortune. She wasn't looking to make headlines or have her name in lights. She simply needed a job. And so, when an opportunity arose for her to become a maid at a grand estate in the heart of the city, she took it without hesitation. After all, the pay was good, and who could resist the thought of working in a mansion? For someone like Emily, it was as close to a fairy tale as life was ever going to get. But here's where things get interesting. The mansion she walked into wasn't just any mansion, it was the residence of a wealthy family with secrets, power plays, and a history darker than you could ever imagine. Emily wasn't just going to scrub floors and wash windows here. No, there was something more at play, a set of circumstances that would force her to become something far greater than just an employee. And it all began with one simple twist of fate. You see, the family who owned the mansion, the Allens, were in the midst of their own struggles. There were rumors circulating about them, whispers of financial ruin, scandals, and betrayals that no one outside the family knew about. The house was grand, yes, but it was also decaying behind the scenes. Emily could sense the tension in the air the moment she stepped foot inside. The silence was deafening, and the coldness of the walls almost felt like they were alive, watching her as she went about her tasks. And then there was Margaret, Mrs. Allen, the lady of the house. A woman who seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders, a woman who was both elegant and terrifying at the same time. She was not the kind of person you crossed, but she was also not the type to make small talk. It was clear that the mansion held more than just wealth, it held a power, a sense of authority that Emily couldn't fully understand. As days turned into weeks, Emily grew more and more accustomed to her new life. She learned the routines, the hidden corners of the mansion, and the strange habits of the Allens. But there was one thing she never expected. The more she learned about the family, the more she began to understand that the mansion was more than just a place of luxury, it was a trap. The Allens were stuck in their own web of lies and deceit. They were playing a game that had very high stakes, and Emily had unknowingly become a piece on their board. But how could someone like Emily, with no power, no connections, and no experience in the world of high society, possibly have any influence on the game? You'll be surprised by the answer. And then, one night, everything changed. Emily had been working late, cleaning the study when she stumbled upon something that no one was supposed to find. It wasn't a treasure chest or hidden jewels, but something far more valuable, an old document, one that had the power to change everything. You see, the mansion wasn't just owned by the Allens. It had been passed down through generations, and with it came certain responsibilities. Responsibilities that, as fate would have it, Emily was now inheriting. And as she read through the papers, something inside her clicked. The mansion, with all its grandeur and darkness, was now tied to her in ways she couldn't have imagined. But the question remained, would she embrace this newfound power, or would she let it slip through her fingers? Now, you're probably sitting there wondering how in the world Emily, someone who was hired to clean, who had nothing but a simple background, could end up owning the mansion herself. It doesn't make sense, right? That's exactly why you need to keep watching. There's so much more to this story, so many twists and turns that you won't see coming. I promise you, you'll be on the edge of your seat as Emily faces decisions that could either make her or break her. Every step she takes brings her closer to a world she never thought she'd be a part of, a world filled with power, manipulation, and danger. But with it comes a chance at something bigger than she ever dreamed. The mansion, its secrets, and its legacy are all in her hands now, and the future is anything but certain. So, what happens next? How does Emily go from being a maid to taking control of the mansion? Well, let me leave you with this: the twists aren't over, and neither is the game. But before I tell you what happens next, I want you to think about something. What would you do if you were in Emily's shoes? Would you try to keep your head down, or would you seize the opportunity to take everything you've ever wanted? Stick around, because the answer is coming up, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Stay tuned for the next part of this unbelievable journey, and let me show you how one maid's life transformed in ways she never imagined. But remember, nothing is as simple as it seems. When Emily first arrived at the mansion, she wasn't expecting anything unusual, just a job, a means to make ends meet. The Allens were just another wealthy family, and she was just another maid among many. But there was something strange about the way the family carried themselves, something she couldn't quite put her finger on at first. Margaret Allen, the matriarch, was a woman whose presence demanded attention, but there was a coldness to her that was hard to ignore. She always kept her distance, never offering a smile or a word of encouragement. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't kind either. It was almost as if Emily was invisible to her, just another part of the background, a face she didn't care to remember. And then there was Mr. Allen, Richard Allen. He was a man of few words, but Emily couldn't help but notice how his eyes seemed to linger on her whenever they passed in the hallway. It wasn't just a glance, it was as though he was sizing her up, watching her every move. At first, Emily brushed it off, telling herself she was being paranoid. But the more she observed the way he interacted with others, the more she realized something wasn't right. His interactions with his wife were tense, clipped, as though there was a constant undercurrent of frustration, but they never seemed to argue in front of others. That, too, was odd. There were times when Emily caught herself wondering if something was off between the two of them, but she could never prove it. But something else began to trouble her as well. There were others in the house, those who worked in the background, people who seemed to have their own agendas. The housekeeper, for one, an older woman named Mrs. West, always seemed to be hiding something. She was there longer than Emily, and whenever Emily tried to strike up a conversation, Mrs. West would always offer vague answers, never really engaging in any meaningful way. Emily could tell she knew more than she let on, but trying to get any useful information out of her was like trying to draw water from a rock. And then there was the butler, Mr. Harris. He was sharp, observant, and never without a crisp uniform. He had a way of watching Emily, always as if he was calculating something in his mind. More than once, Emily found herself catching him staring at her, his eyes cold and calculating. He didn't make small talk, never joked or smiled, and kept his distance from the rest of the staff. That made Emily wonder, was he simply devoted to his job, or was there something more sinister at play? It wasn't just the staff who made Emily uneasy, it was the entire house itself. The mansion, grand as it was, had a way of making her feel trapped. The high ceilings and long hallways felt like they stretched on forever, each room darker than the last, as if hiding something. The windows were large, yes, but always seemed to be covered by heavy curtains, as if the house was trying to keep something or someone inside. The atmosphere was oppressive, and Emily felt like she was constantly being watched, whether by the Allens or the walls themselves. There were times she'd be in the kitchen, cooking dinner for the family, and hear strange noises echoing through the halls. It was easy to dismiss them as the house settling, But there were nights when the sound of footsteps, quick, hurried footsteps, would send a chill down her spine. And then there was the matter of the hidden room. It was one of the first things Emily had noticed when she started working in the mansion. It was tucked away behind an old bookshelf in the library, a small door that appeared to lead nowhere. Mrs. West had warned her to stay away from it. "It's just an old storage room," she'd said with a strange look in her eyes. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. Every time she dusted the shelves, she would catch sight of the hidden door, half hidden by shadows. And one evening, when she'd been left alone in the library, she decided to investigate. The door opened with a creak, revealing nothing but a dusty, empty room. But as Emily stepped inside, she noticed something strange. There were papers scattered across the floor, papers that seemed to be documents of some kind. She bent down to pick them up, her heart racing as she realized they were written in old script, contracts, letters, something about the mansion's ownership. Emily wasn't an expert in legal matters, but she could tell these weren't ordinary documents. They were important, possibly even dangerous. She stuffed them in her apron and left the room quickly, but the sense of unease had only grown. The more she tried to brush off these oddities, the more they seemed to spiral into something bigger, something that threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew about the Allens, about the mansion, and about herself. There was something hidden here, something the Allens were trying desperately to keep secret, and Emily couldn't let it go. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she started piecing together the fragments of information she could gather: talks with Mrs. West, half-heard conversations between Richard and Margaret, the strange behavior of the staff. But no matter how many pieces of the puzzle she found, there was always something missing, something that prevented her from seeing the bigger picture. Emily started to wonder if she was in over her head. The more she uncovered, the more she realized she was entangled in a game she didn't fully understand. But as the days passed, her desire to know the truth grew stronger. She couldn't walk away now, not when she was so close. And that was when the most terrifying realization hit her. The mansion wasn't just a house. It was a battleground. The Allens, with all their wealth and power, were playing a dangerous game, one that could cost someone everything. As Emily delved deeper into the mansion's secrets, she found herself questioning who could be trusted and who was hiding something. Was Mrs. West merely a silent observer, or was she part of the family's secrets? Did Mr. Harris know more than he let on, or was he just as trapped as Emily? And Richard Allen, was he a victim of his own circumstances, or was he the one pulling the strings behind the scenes? Each day that passed, Emily felt like she was being drawn further into the web of deception and intrigue that surrounded the mansion. But there was still one question that haunted her: what did she truly want out of all of this? Was she looking for answers, or was she searching for something more? As the mystery deepened, Emily realized that whatever the Allens were hiding, whatever dark force loomed within the mansion's walls, it was only a matter of time before it would come for her. But she was no longer just a maid. She had become part of the story. And the story was far from over days past, and the more Emily uncovered, the deeper the mystery seemed to grow. Each new piece of information only led to more questions. The documents she had found hidden in that dusty room, the ones that spoke of ownership contracts and what seemed to be legal disputes over the mansion, weren't just interesting, they were critical. They held the answers Emily had been searching for. But as soon as she started to make sense of them, something strange happened. One afternoon, while she was going over the papers again, trying to make sense of the language, she came to an alarming realization. The stack of documents she had carefully hidden in her apron for safekeeping had vanished. She hadn't left the room. She hadn't even stepped out to take a break. And yet, when she returned to the small drawer where she had hidden them, there was nothing there, just the faint smell of the old leather-bound desk and the muffled silence of the mansion. Panic set in. Had someone taken them? But who? Emily ran through the possibilities in her head. Could it have been Mrs. West, who'd caught her sneaking around? Or was it Mr. Harris, the ever-watchful butler, who seemed to know every move she made? She couldn't understand how anyone could have known about the documents. She hadn't told a soul. But the more she thought about it, the more it became clear that someone was trying to stop her from finding the truth. Someone who didn't want her to get any closer to uncovering the mansion's secrets. Frustration and fear began to eat away at her. She wasn't naive, she knew she was in danger. But what troubled her even more was the growing sense of paranoia. Was she being watched more than she realized? Were the Allens, specifically Richard, more involved in the conspiracy than she thought? The strange tension she had noticed between him and his wife suddenly took on a new meaning. Was Richard hiding something? Or had he been caught in a game that was spiraling out of control? And then, as if to complicate matters further, a new obstacle appeared in the form of Mrs. West. One evening, as Emily was returning to her room after a long shift, she ran into the older housekeeper in the hallway. Mrs. West's usual calm demeanor had shifted. Her eyes were wide with something that looked like concern, but there was an edge to it that Emily had never seen before. "You need to stop looking," Mrs. West had whispered hurriedly, her voice barely above a murmur. Emily was taken aback. She had no idea what Mrs. West was talking about. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. But the older woman's eyes darted nervously down the hallway before she leaned in closer. "The mansion, it's not what you think. You need to leave it alone before it's too late." Emily froze. The cryptic warning hit her like a cold wind. For a moment, she stood there, unsure of how to respond. But before she could ask any more questions, Mrs. West quickly walked away, leaving Emily with nothing but the unsettling feeling that there was far more to this than she could possibly understand. It was then that Emily began to wonder, was Mrs. West trying to warn her out of genuine concern, or was she trying to protect her own secrets? Had the housekeeper been involved in the strange events all along? Emily couldn't help but think that Mrs. West knew something, a truth buried deep in the mansion's history, and she was trying to push Emily away from it. But why? What could be so dangerous that someone like Mrs. West would go to such lengths to stop her from finding out? Emily couldn't let it go. She had already come too far, and the pieces were finally beginning to fit together. The mansion wasn't just a family home, it was a battleground for control, with every person in it playing a part in a dangerous game. But the question still remained, who was the true enemy, and who could she trust? As she delved deeper into her investigation, Emily started noticing even more strange occurrences. Late one night, while cleaning the library, she found an old, tattered photograph tucked behind one of the books. The picture was black and white, showing a younger Margaret Allen, standing beside a man Emily had never seen before. The man's face was shadowed, but there was a certain intensity to his expression. Margaret looked different too, there was something about her smile that was cold, almost calculating. Emily turned the photo over to find something written on the back, but before she could read it, the door to the library slammed shut, and she jumped, her heart racing. The air grew colder, and for a split second, Emily thought she saw something or someone move in the shadows. She couldn't explain it, but it felt like the house itself was reacting to her presence. Terrified, she shoved the photograph into her pocket and rushed out of the room. The mansion felt more oppressive than ever, the walls closing in on her as if trying to trap her in a game she hadn't fully understood yet. But what troubled Emily the most was the growing realization that the Allens weren't just hiding their past, they were trying to protect something. Or someone. And whoever, or whatever, it wasn't going to let Emily uncover the truth without a fight. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous things seemed to get. And just when Emily thought she might be getting closer to the answer, another obstacle appeared. This time, it wasn't something she could just ignore. One morning, when she arrived at the mansion to begin her shift, she was met with a cold, unsettling silence. The staff was gone. All of them. Mrs. West, Mr. Harris, and even the cooks all absent without any explanation. But what was even more disturbing was the way the mansion felt. It was as if the house itself had been abandoned. The lights flickered strangely, and the air was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something darker. It felt wrong, like a storm was about to break. As Emily walked through the empty halls, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, terribly off. And then, as she rounded the corner to the grand staircase, she saw it. At the foot of the stairs lay a familiar object, one of the documents she had found earlier, crumpled and torn. But that wasn't the strangest part. The document was marked with a symbol she hadn't seen before, a symbol that looked like a crest, something tied to the mansion's history, but one she hadn't been able to decipher. Her heart skipped a beat. Someone was trying to send her a message, and it wasn't one she was going to ignore. But as Emily reached for the torn document, she heard a faint sound behind her. It was the unmistakable click of heels against the marble floors. And when she turned around, there was no one there. Just the cold, empty halls of the mansion. She couldn't help but wonder, was she being followed? Or was it something far more sinister than she'd imagined? With her heart pounding, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of the mansion were closing in around her and she was about to uncover something far darker than she ever imagined. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stood in the silence of the grand hallway, the crumpled document still in her hand, its torn edges threatening to unravel the mystery even further. The sound of the heels had stopped, and the unease in her chest tightened like a vice. She glanced over her shoulder again, expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the eerie quiet of the empty mansion. She had no idea who or what was playing these games with her, but it was clear now that the stakes were much higher than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't just about uncovering the secrets of the Allen family anymore. It was about survival. She had to know why she was being targeted, why the mansion was fighting back so fiercely. But just as she thought she might be able to piece together the mystery, something else happened. Something that added a layer of complexity to the already tangled web she was trapped in. It started with a phone call, one that Emily wasn't expecting. It was from her brother, Jake, someone she hadn't spoken to in months. He was the only family she had left, and their relationship had always been complicated. He was a good guy, but life had pulled them in different directions. He had no idea what Emily had been going through, what had been happening at the mansion. But as soon as she answered the phone, his voice sounded unusually urgent, as if he had been trying to reach her for days. Listen to me, he said, his voice tight with fear. I don't know how to say this, but I found something. Something you need to see. It's about the mansion. About the Allens. Emily's heart skipped a beat. The timing couldn't have been worse. She was already deep into her own investigation, and now her brother was involved in this. She had no idea how Jake even knew about the mansion, let alone how he could be connected to whatever was going on, but his words made it clear that this wasn't a coincidence. What do you mean, Jake? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the sudden rush of adrenaline flooding her veins. Jake hesitated on the other end, and Emily could hear the tension in his breath. I found a letter. It was addressed to you, but it wasn't from anyone you know. It was weird. It didn't make sense, but it mentioned your name and the mansion. It said that you were in danger, and you need to stop digging into things you don't understand. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. Another warning. She wasn't sure whether to feel relieved that someone else was finally acknowledging the danger or terrified that her brother had somehow been dragged into this mess. Where did you find it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake, where is it? I found it in an old box of your stuff, Jake replied, his voice cracking slightly. It was tucked away in the attic. I didn't know what to make of it, but I thought you'd want to see it. Emily didn't know how to react. How had a letter like that ended up in her things? Who could have sent it, and why had Jake only found it now? Her mind raced as she considered the implications. Whoever had sent the letter knew about her connection to the mansion. They were aware of everything she'd been doing, every step she'd taken to uncover the truth. But why now? Why had the letter only come to light at this moment? It seemed like a warning, a deliberate attempt to stop her from digging deeper. And the fact that it had found its way to her brother only added another layer of uncertainty. Emily felt a sinking feeling in her stomach, as if the walls of the mansion were closing in on her from every direction. I don't know, but I think you need to be careful. I know you're looking for answers, but this isn't just about the mansion anymore. Something bigger is going on. And I don't think you can trust anyone around you. Jake's words hung in the air long after the phone call ended. Something bigger was going on. Emily could feel the weight of those words pressing down on her. She wasn't alone in this, but the fact that someone else, someone so close to her, was being dragged into this chaos made it all the more real. The mystery of the mansion had escalated from something personal to something that was far more dangerous. She had been trying to piece together the truth for herself, but now she realized the pieces were scattered far beyond the walls of the mansion. This wasn't just about the Allens anymore. Whoever was pulling the strings behind the scenes had far more control over her life than she had realized. And they were making sure she knew it. The sense of paranoia that had been building inside her grew stronger with each passing hour. Every conversation, every encounter, felt like a potential trap. Was Mrs. West's warning just an attempt to keep her out of something she didn't understand, or was there more to it? Was the letter from her brother a genuine cry for help, or was it another move in a game she couldn't yet comprehend? She wasn't sure who to trust anymore, not even her own brother, who had always been her rock. To make matters worse, another strange occurrence added more layers to the confusion. One night, after another long day of searching for clues in the mansion, Emily returned to her room only to find something she hadn't expected. A new note, folded neatly and left on her pillow. She hadn't seen anyone enter her room, and the house had been silent all day. The note was short, handwritten in jagged, hurried script, and the words on it were enough to make her stomach drop. "They're watching you. Don't trust Jake. It's already too late." The blood drained from her face as she stared at the note, her hands trembling as she read and reread it. Who could have left it? Who knew about Jake, and why would someone say she couldn't trust him? Emily felt a wave of nausea wash over her, the tension in the house becoming almost unbearable. It was clear now that whoever was behind this had more resources, more power, than she could possibly understand. They knew about her brother, and they were warning her off, telling her to stop asking questions. But Emily wasn't ready to back down. She had come too far. Still, the question remained, who could she trust? The walls of the mansion, once a place of grandiose beauty, had turned into a labyrinth of deception, every room a potential danger, every shadow hiding secrets that no one wanted uncovered. Was Jake truly part of this game? Or was he just another pawn, unknowingly dragged into a plot far beyond his control? And what about the Allens? Were they innocent victims caught up in a twisted web of lies, or were they the ones pulling the strings? Emily felt the tension tightening around her, the sense of dread growing stronger as the pieces of the puzzle slipped further and further out of her reach. As she turned the note over, she noticed something on the back, in tiny, almost imperceptible writing, was one final word: trust no one. The mansion had become more than just a place to work, it had become her prison. And the only way out was to find the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. But as she stood there, staring at the note, Emily couldn't help but wonder, what had she just walked into? And was it already too late to escape? The danger was closing in, and time was running out. The tension in the mansion had reached its breaking point, but it wasn't until the night everything changed that Emily truly understood the danger she was in. The sense of unease that had followed her for weeks, the paranoia that gnawed at her every time she turned a corner or passed a shadowy hallway, all of it suddenly felt too real. She was no longer just uncovering a mystery, she was living in one. The walls of the mansion, which once seemed like mere structures, now felt like prison bars closing in on her. The air had become thick with a sense of impending doom, and Emily could no longer shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. She couldn't tell if she was imagining it or if it was just the weight of all the strange happenings bearing down on her, but the paranoia had reached a point where every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, made her jump in fear. It was as though the mansion itself had come alive, whispering secrets and warnings in the dark. That night, Emily had stayed up late, going over the notes and documents she had gathered over the past few weeks. Her mind was spinning with the possibilities, with the increasing certainty that the Allens were hiding something far darker than she could have ever anticipated. And yet, for all her effort, she still couldn't piece it together. The mansion felt like an impenetrable fortress, its secrets locked away behind layers of lies and deceit. As she sat there, lost in thought, the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, pulling her attention away from the papers. She froze, the hair on the back of her neck standing up as the sound grew louder. Someone was coming. But who? She stood up quickly, her heart pounding in her chest as she moved cautiously toward the door. She had learned by now not to ignore her instincts, and right now, every fiber of her being screamed that something was terribly wrong. The footsteps weren't normal. They were deliberate, too measured, as though whoever it was trying to make sure they were heard. As Emily peered through the crack in the door, her breath caught in her throat when she saw a figure standing at the far end of the hallway. The silhouette was faint, but unmistakable. It was Richard Allen. He was standing in the shadows, staring toward her room, his expression unreadable. She couldn't see his face clearly, but his posture was stiff, like a predator waiting for its prey. Her mind raced. Why was he here? Was he watching her? And if so, for how long? The fear that had been growing in her chest suddenly surged, consuming her thoughts. Was this the moment everything she had uncovered was about to be exposed? Was he the one behind the strange events, the manipulations, the dangers she had been feeling? The figure remained there for what felt like an eternity, and then, as suddenly as he appeared, Richard turned and disappeared down the hallway. Emily stood there, her heart still hammering in her chest, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. She had no doubt now that someone was following her, someone who knew more than she had ever imagined. Her mind reeled with the possibilities. Had Richard seen her? Did he know she was aware of the mansion's secrets? Or had he simply been there for another reason entirely? Was he part of a larger conspiracy, or was he the puppet, pulled along by forces much greater than him? The uncertainty was maddening. Emily waited in her room for what felt like hours, every noise, every gust of wind making her jump. The fear she had felt earlier had now turned into a suffocating weight, as though the mansion's very walls were closing in around her, trapping her inside. She tried to calm herself, but the fear was too overwhelming. She had to know what was going on, had to find out if Richard was really involved or if there was someone else, someone more dangerous, pulling the strings. She couldn't just sit there and wait anymore. The following morning, everything changed. Emily woke to an empty house, a silence that felt unsettlingly unnatural. The usual hum of activity, staff members cleaning, Mrs. West tending to the house, Mr. Harris moving silently in and out of rooms, was gone. The mansion felt deserted, almost abandoned. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she stepped out into the hallway. It was eerily quiet, like the calm before a storm. She hurried downstairs, her mind racing with 100 questions. Had everyone left? Or worse, had something happened to them? She had a bad feeling, a feeling she couldn't shake, no matter how hard she tried to push it away. When she reached the kitchen, her worst fears were confirmed. The door to the pantry was wide open, and inside, the usually neat shelves had been upturned. Food was scattered across the floor, and the air was thick with the scent of something rancid. But it wasn't just the mess that sent a chill down Emily's spine, it was the note. It was hastily scribbled, smeared with what looked like ink or something darker. "You shouldn't have come. It's too late now." The words sent a wave of nausea crashing through her. Whoever had left it was taunting her, mocking her with the same cryptic threats she had received before. But this was different. This note wasn't left by someone who was just warning her. This was a direct threat, one that felt personal. They knew where she was. They knew what she had been doing. As Emily backed away from the note, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Jake, the one person she thought she could rely on. Her heart skipped as she read the text. Something's happened. I can't find her. Where is Mom? She's gone, and I don't know where she went." Her pulse surged in her ears as she tried to make sense of the message. What did this mean? Her mother? Where was she? The confusion and fear hit her all at once, and the realization struck with the force of a blow. Something was happening, something bigger than she had ever imagined. Her family was being drawn into this, and Emily had no idea who or what she could trust. Was her mother involved in this nightmare somehow? Or had she become another victim? Suddenly, the mansion felt less like a place she was investigating and more like a trap. A trap that had been set for her the moment she had walked in. Every corner, every shadow, every noise felt like a threat. She couldn't trust anyone, especially not the Allens, and not even Jake anymore. Emily had thought she was close to uncovering the truth, but now, the deeper she dug, the more she realized that the truth might be far more terrifying than she could ever imagine. The danger was real, and it was coming for her. As she rushed out of the kitchen, trying to gather her bearings, a noise echoed from above, followed by a low creak. Emily turned quickly, her breath catching in her throat. She was no longer alone in the mansion. And whoever was coming for her wasn't going to stop until they had everything she had uncovered, and more. The walls were closing in faster than she could outrun them. Emily's heart raced as she made her way down the darkened hallway, the echo of her footsteps louder than ever in the eerie silence of the mansion. The walls seemed to press in on her, suffocating her with the weight of the secrets they held. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something, and every corner could lead to another danger she wasn't prepared for. But she couldn't stop now. She had to keep moving forward, had to find her mother, had to understand why everything had spiraled out of control so quickly. But just as she reached the grand staircase, a sound stopped her dead in her tracks, footsteps, deliberate and slow, coming from behind her. She turned, her breath caught in her throat. For a brief moment, she saw nothing but darkness, but then a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Richard Allen again, but this time there was something different about him. His face, usually cold and distant, was twisted with something she couldn't quite place, an emotion she'd never seen before. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. Emily's mind raced. What did he know? What was he hiding? She couldn't afford to trust him, but she had no other choice. "You're not safe here," Richard said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. There was something about the way he spoke, something that made her doubt everything she'd thought she knew. She had assumed that Richard was one of the culprits, someone involved in the twisted games being played with her. But now, as she looked into his eyes, she realized something had shifted. He wasn't the one in control, he was just as much a victim of whatever was happening here as she was. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. Richard glanced around quickly, as if making sure no one else was watching, before he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't understand. None of this is what you think it is. The mansion, the Allens, they're not the ones you need to be worried about. It's something much darker, something that's been hidden in plain sight for years. And now it's all coming to the surface." Emily stared at him, trying to process his words. She felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. All of this, the Allens, the mansion, the strange happenings, wasn't what she thought. What was he trying to tell her? What was he hiding? Before she could ask more, Richard's eyes darted nervously to the side, and he quickly stepped back, shaking his head. "I can't say more right now. It's not safe. Just trust me on this. You have to get out of here. You're playing a game you don't understand, and you don't want to know what happens next." But before Emily could react, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving her standing there, reeling from the flood of new information. Get out. Was that his way of warning her, or was it a way to manipulate her into leaving before she discovered something even more dangerous? She was left standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. What was Richard trying to tell her? What was the truth behind all of this? Emily's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle scattering in every direction. She had been so sure that the mansion was full of dark secrets, that the Allens were somehow at the center of everything that was happening. But Richard's words had shaken that belief to its core. Had she been wrong all along? Was there something else, something more sinister, that was truly behind all of the strange events she'd experienced? As she tried to make sense of it all, Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Jake, but it wasn't what she expected. The message was short, urgent. "I found something. You won't believe this, but Mom's been hiding something from us. Something important. I need to talk to you. Meet me at the old study." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her mother. What had she been hiding? Had this all been connected to her in some way? The idea of meeting Jake in the study made her stomach turn. After everything that had happened, everything that had been revealed, she didn't know if she could trust anyone, not even her brother. But something in her gut told her this was important. This was the missing piece she needed to understand what was really going on. But as she started to turn toward the staircase, a sudden, sharp pain in her chest stopped her dead in her tracks. She gasped for air, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. What was happening? The walls of the mansion seemed to close in, the air thick and suffocating. And then, without warning, a figure appeared at the top of the stairs, and Emily froze. It was her mother. But this wasn't the woman she had known, the mother who had always been there for her, always had the answers. This woman was different, darker, colder, like a shell of the person she had once been. And when their eyes met, Emily saw something she couldn't unsee. It was a look of recognition, of knowing, of something far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. Her mother smiled, but it wasn't a smile of comfort or reassurance. It was a smile that made Emily's blood run cold. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," her mother said, her voice smooth, almost predatory. "You've been looking in the wrong places, sweetheart. All along, you've been chasing ghosts. But you're about to uncover the real truth, whether you're ready for it or not." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Emily realized how little she truly knew. The mansion, the Allens, even her mother, everything she thought was true had been a carefully constructed lie. And now, as the pieces began to fall into place, Emily understood that she was standing on the edge of something far darker, far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Her mind reeled as she tried to process what her mother had just said. How could this be happening? How could the woman she trusted, the woman who had raised her, be a part of this twisted nightmare? And what did it all mean? What was the truth that had been hidden from her all along? As the fear and confusion swirled inside her, Emily knew one thing for certain: she had just uncovered the first layer of something so much bigger than she could ever have anticipated. And the more she uncovered, the more the mansion revealed itself to be a labyrinth of lies, deceit, and danger. She was in deeper than ever before, and there was no way out. The real mystery, the real danger, was only just beginning. And now, it seemed like no one was who they appeared to be, least of all the people she had trusted the most. Emily stood frozen, her mind spiraling as her mother's chilling words echoed in her ears. The woman who had always been her protector, the one who had given her everything, was now standing before her as a stranger, a puzzle she couldn't solve. Her mother's smile twisted with something darker now, something that sent a rush of panic through Emily's chest. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," her mother had said, as if everything she'd done, all the deceit and silence, had been a carefully orchestrated performance. The realization hit Emily with the force of a truck. She hadn't just been playing a game of uncovering secrets, she had been living in someone else's story, someone else's twisted reality. Her mind raced as she tried to process what had just happened. Every moment in the mansion, every interaction, every warning, every strange happening, suddenly seemed to carry a weight she hadn't been able to see before. Her mother, her own flesh and blood, was somehow tied to the dark forces that had been at play all along. And worse, she had been complicit in everything. But why? What was her motive? Was she just a pawn in some larger game, or was she the one pulling the strings? The air between them thickened as Emily stood, struggling to find words, struggling to breathe. Her mother hadn't even flinched when she made that statement, as though this was all just another step in a carefully planned scheme. Emily opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. How could she confront her mother about all of this? How could she even begin to ask the questions that were swirling in her mind? Emily had trusted her mother more than anyone, had relied on her for guidance, comfort, and love. But now, with every passing second, that trust was slipping away, unraveling like a tightly wound thread. And then came the realization, the one that hit Emily with the cold truth of the situation. Whatever was happening here, whatever dark forces were at play in the mansion, were connected to her mother. There was no way around it. Emily had been investigating the wrong people, chasing the wrong clues. Her mother was at the center of it all. Her breath caught in her chest as her mother took a slow step toward her, her eyes now cold and calculating, a look that Emily had never seen before. "You've been so determined to find the truth, haven't you? But there are things you don't understand. Things I can't explain." "Not yet," her mother said, her voice almost emotionless, like a machine designed to utter only what was necessary. Emily's heart was pounding in her chest as the weight of the situation began to suffocate her. She could feel it now, this unbearable pressure that made it almost impossible to think straight. Her world, everything she knew, was crumbling right in front of her, and she had no idea what to do next. "You've been hiding something from me," Emily said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "Why? What's really going on here? I need to know the truth, please, Mom. I need you to tell me." Her mother's expression didn't change. "The truth. The truth is, there's no way out of this, Emily. No matter what you think you know, the moment you step too far into this, You're trapped. You can't go back. And I can't protect you anymore. Those words, I can't protect you anymore, hit Emily like a slap to the face. All her life, her mother had been her shield, her protector. The one constant in a world that was often unpredictable and cold. But now, that protection was gone, ripped away like a security blanket thrown into a fire. She was standing on the edge of a cliff, and no one at all, was there to catch her if she fell. As Emily tried to process her mother's cold, almost indifferent words, the realization that her safety had never truly been guaranteed set in. She wasn't just up against the unknown, she was up against her own mother, a person who had kept her in the dark for reasons that were now impossible to understand. But as she struggled to piece everything together, a text message flashed on her phone, and her heart skipped a beat. It was from Jake, her brother, the one person who had always been a beacon of normalcy in her increasingly chaotic life. The message was brief but filled with an unsettling urgency. Don't trust Mom. Whatever she told you is a lie. I've found something that changes everything. Meet me. Now. The weight of the message settled over Emily like a dark cloud. What was Jake talking about? Why did he say not to trust their mother? What had he uncovered that would turn everything she thought she knew upside down? But before she could process the message fully, her mother spoke again, her tone sharp and commanding. You have a choice, Emily, she said. You can leave right now. Forget all of this. Walk away and go back to your life. Live the life you always thought you had, free from the consequences of digging into things you weren't meant to uncover. Or, you can continue with this madness. But if you do, there's no turning back. Understand? Emily's mind raced as she stood there, her body frozen in place, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. What was she supposed to do? What choice was she supposed to make? Should she listen to her mother and walk away? Was that even possible? Could she just erase everything she had uncovered, pretend it had never happened, and go back to being the person she was before all of this? Or was she truly in too deep now, so far into the web of secrets and lies that there was no escaping it? She thought of Jake, of the urgency in his message. Could she trust him? Was he really trying to protect her, or was there something more to his involvement? The tension between her mother and herself was palpable now, thick enough to cut with a knife. Emily's mind churned with fear, confusion, and anger. The truth was slipping further and further away from her, and no matter which way she turned, the choices before her seemed impossible. Every option felt like a trap, a choice that would change everything and leave her with no way to return. The stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined, and the truth, if she could even find it, might be more dangerous than she ever thought. I don't know what you want from me, but I'm not backing down, Emily said, her voice hoarse with emotion. She wasn't sure if it was the right choice, but she had to know the truth. She had to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. Her mother's eyes flickered with something unreadable, regret, perhaps, or something darker. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then I suppose there's no saving you now. And with that, Emily realized that whatever path she chose, the consequences would be irreversible. Every step forward would bring her closer to the truth, but also closer to a danger that she couldn't fully understand. The mansion, the Allens, even her mother, nothing was as it seemed. And now, in the silence that followed, she was forced to make the impossible decision: run and pretend none of this ever happened, or face whatever horrors were waiting to be uncovered. Emily's mind raced, her pulse hammering in her ears, as she stood face to face with the woman who had been her mother, the woman who had built her life and kept her safe. Or so she thought. The weight of her mother's words, the cold indifference in her voice, sank deep into Emily's gut. You've made your choice, her mother had said, her expression unreadable. Now, there's no turning back. Every instinct in Emily screamed to run, to escape the suffocating grip of the mansion and all its secrets, but deep down she knew she couldn't. Not anymore. She had already crossed a line, and now, there was no going back. As much as she wanted to close her eyes, pretend none of this was happening, she couldn't. The truth was out there, hidden behind lies, shadows, and betrayal, and she needed to find it. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, to demand more answers, the sound of footsteps interrupted her. Emily spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. It was Jake, her brother, But something was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear as he hurried toward her, glancing over his shoulder as though someone or something was following him. "What's going on?" Emily demanded, her voice a mix of relief and anxiety. "Jake, you won't believe what Mom just told me. She's part of this. She knows everything." Jake shook his head, his expression shifting to one of urgency. "Emily, listen to me. You need to get out of here. Now." "Why? What's going on? What's happening?" But Jake didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back of the mansion, moving swiftly, his steps quick and sure, like he knew exactly where to go. Emily felt the tightness in her chest as she followed him, fear gnawing at her insides. What had he uncovered? Why was he acting like this, like someone was after them? They reached the old study, the one place that had always felt like a sanctuary, a place untouched by the chaos outside. But now, as they entered the room, Emily felt the air grow heavy with tension. There was something wrong, something that made her stomach twist in dread. Jake slammed the door shut behind them, locking it with a shaking hand before he turned to face her. His eyes, wide with a mix of fear and disbelief, met hers. "You need to understand something, Emily," he said, his voice strained. "I've been looking into everything. The mansion, Mom, the Allens, it's all connected. But it's worse than I ever thought. Someone we trust, they've been working against us this whole time." Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. "Who? Who's been working against us?" Jake didn't respond immediately, his eyes flicking toward the window nervously before he looked back at her. It's Richard. He's not who he says he is, Emily. He's been manipulating everything. And now, he's pulling strings that are bigger than we can even imagine." Richard. The same Richard who had seemed so out of place in the mansion. The one who had warned Emily to leave before it was too late. The one who had always felt like an enigma, someone lurking just outside her understanding. Emily's mind whirled, the revelation hitting her with the force of a brick. She had always suspected Richard was hiding something, but to hear Jake confirm it, it felt like the ground beneath her was collapsing. "Richard," she whispered, almost unable to process it. "Why? What's he after?" Jake's voice dropped to a whisper, and Emily had to lean in to hear him. "He's been working with someone from the outside. A group people with power, people who control things behind the scenes. This mansion, everything that's happened, it's all part of something much bigger than us. This isn't just about us or Mom or the mansion. They've been using us all as pawns in their game." A chill ran down Emily's spine. The pieces of the puzzle, the ones she had been desperately trying to fit together, suddenly snapped into place. The strange occurrences, the twisted secrets of the mansion, the sudden threats, it was all part of a plan, a scheme that had been set in motion long before she'd ever stepped foot inside the mansion. This was bigger than just her family. This was about something far darker, something that had been building for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Who are these people, Jake?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper, fear creeping into every syllable. "I don't know yet," he replied, shaking his head. "But I've found something. A file, hidden in the study. It's all here. All of it. Everything. The connections, the players, the people pulling the strings. And Richard's at the center of it." Emily's heart raced as she felt the weight of his words sink in. Richard had been working with someone on the outside. Someone powerful, someone with the kind of influence that could manipulate everything they knew. It wasn't just the mansion at stake anymore, it was everything. Their lives, their family, their safety. Everything was being controlled by forces far beyond their understanding. "Emily, you need to know something," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. "This isn't just about us anymore. They're after something that could change everything. And they won't stop until they get it." Before Emily could ask what he meant, there was a loud crash from the hallway. The door to the study shook violently, and Emily's heart leapt in her chest as she realized they weren't alone. Someone, or something, was coming for them. Jake's face drained of color as he turned to her, his expression grim. "Get out of here," he ordered, his voice rising in desperation. "Now. They're coming. You have to go, Emily. Don't worry about me. Just go." Emily hesitated, her mind in turmoil. She wanted to fight, to stay and confront whatever was coming for them, but she knew that Jake was right. If they were going to survive this, they had to get out. Fast. But as she turned to run, a voice called out from behind her, and she froze. Don't bother running. It was Richard. Standing in the doorway, his face twisted into a smirk, the last shred of trust Emily had in him shattered in an instant. He had been lying to her all along. He had been manipulating her, pulling her into this web of lies and deceit. And now, it was too late. They were trapped. Welcome to the real game, Richard said, his voice smooth and cold. You've all been nothing more than pawns. And the game's about to get a lot more interesting. Emily felt her heart pound in her chest as Richard stepped into the room, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous, almost predatory light. The walls seemed to close in around her, and she realized with sickening clarity that she had underestimated the scale of the conspiracy. It wasn't just about her mother or the mansion, it was about something far more dangerous, something that had been brewing in the shadows for years, and now, the clock was ticking down. Whatever Richard was planning, it was coming to a head. And Emily, Jake, and everyone else in the mansion were about to be caught in the crossfire. The game had just begun. And this time, no one was safe. The tension in the air was suffocating as Emily stood, her body frozen in place, every muscle taut with fear. Richard's cold gaze pierced through her, his smirk only growing more sinister as he took a step forward, his presence like a shadow closing in on her. Behind him, the study door had been thrown wide open, revealing a group of figures emerging from the hallway. They were people she didn't recognize, men and women in dark, expensive suits, their expressions hard and unreadable. They moved in perfect sync, as though they had done this 1,000 times before. This was it, the final moment. Everything she had learned, everything she had fought for, had led her here. But she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Richard to be the mastermind, the one pulling the strings behind it all, and she certainly hadn't anticipated the people who had been backing him. Her brother Jake, still standing beside her, seemed to stiffen as the group entered the room, his eyes flickering nervously. Emily could feel his tension, his growing realization that they had both been outplayed. All this time, they had thought they were uncovering the truth, pulling at the threads of a mystery that had plagued their lives. But in reality, they had been walking right into a trap that had been set long before they even stepped foot in the mansion. Richard's voice broke through the silence, his tone smooth and confident, as though he were delivering some sort of lecture. You really thought you were uncovering some grand conspiracy, didn't you? He said, his words dripping with contempt. That your mother had been hiding things, that you were the hero in your little story. But the truth is, Emily, you were never the hero. You were the distraction. A pawn in a game far bigger than you could ever understand. The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Her entire world, everything she thought she knew, had been turned upside down in an instant. She had trusted Richard. She had believed in him, even when her instincts told her something was off. But now, standing in front of her, he wasn't just the man she had come to rely on, he was the villain in her story, the one who had orchestrated this whole mess from the very beginning. Everything I've done, everything I've told you, was part of a plan, Richard continued, his voice growing colder. You were never supposed to find out. You were supposed to be the perfect little daughter, the dutiful sister, just like your mother raised you to be. But now that you've seen too much, it's time for you to play your part. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing to make sense of everything. There had to be a way out of this, a way to expose Richard, to bring the truth to light. But as she looked around the room, at the people who stood behind him, she realized just how deep this went. These weren't just random individuals, these were powerful people who had the means to make things disappear, to bury the truth beneath layers of lies and manipulation. You're all part of this? Emily asked, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and rage. You've been controlling everything. My mother, the mansion, the people around us, it's all been a lie. Richard's smile widened, almost pitying. You still don't get it, do you? This mansion, your family, it's all part of something far larger. The people in this room, they control things you can't even imagine. And now, we control you. Jake's voice broke through the tension, low and hoarse. It's true, Emily. They're connected to the people I've been investigating. The connections run deep. It's not just about the mansion, it's about power, control, influence. And now they want us to play their game. Emily turned to her brother, her mind spinning with the gravity of his words. Everything she had thought was a personal vendetta, a family secret, was just the tip of the iceberg. What was at stake wasn't just her family's legacy, it was something far more dangerous. She had always believed that the mansion, the Allens, and everything tied to them had been the root of her problems. But now, she realized that the Allens were just pawns too, pawns in a much larger, more dangerous game. And her family, her mother, her brother, had been players in it from the very beginning. Richard stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. "You've done well to get this far. But now, you're going to learn the real truth." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, thick envelope, tossing it onto the desk in front of Emily. "That's the last piece of the puzzle. Everything you've been looking for is inside. All the answers you need. But I warn you, be careful what you wish for." Emily's hand trembled as she reached for the envelope, her breath catching in her throat. What could possibly be in there? A final, damning revelation? A piece of evidence that would destroy everything she thought she knew? As she opened the envelope, her hands shaking with a mixture of fear and anticipation, she pulled out a single photograph. At first, she couldn't understand what she was looking at. But then, as her eyes focused, her stomach dropped. The photo was a picture of her mother, but it wasn't just her mother. Standing next to her was someone Emily had never seen before, a man, dressed in a dark suit, with a cold smile on his face. But it wasn't the man's face that caught her attention. It was the building behind them, the very same mansion that Emily had called home for so long. The photo wasn't just a picture of her mother. It was a picture of her mother, with Richard, standing in front of the mansion, 20 years ago. This wasn't just a family secret, it was a well-orchestrated deception that had been going on for decades. The realization hit Emily like a tidal wave. The mansion, her family, the Allens, they were all connected to something much darker, something far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. And now, Emily was in the center of it all. She had spent so much time looking for answers, but the answers were always right in front of her, buried beneath layers of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. And just when Emily thought she couldn't take it anymore, when the weight of everything became too much to bear, a loud crash echoed through the mansion, shaking the walls. The lights flickered. Richard's expression changed, his eyes narrowing. "What was that?" he hissed, his voice now laced with genuine fear. Before anyone could react, the door to the study burst open, and in rushed a familiar figure, Jake. But it wasn't just Jake. He was holding something in his hand, something that shimmered in the dim light. A gun. Richard's eyes widened in shock as Jake pointed the weapon directly at him, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You thought you had it all figured out," Jake said, his voice low and steady, "but you never saw this coming." Emily's mind spun, confusion flooding her senses. What was Jake doing? Why was he holding a gun? Was he really going to? The shot rang out, echoing through the mansion, and everything went black. The game had changed again. But this time, there were no more rules. And the truth? The truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The mansion was quiet now. The chaos had subsided, and the dust had begun to settle. It had been weeks since that night, weeks since everything had changed, since Emily had confronted the truth she never expected to find. Jake was gone now, his actions that night leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and shattered trust. The gunshot had not been what anyone had anticipated. It had not been the final act of defiance, the victory over evil that so many stories promised. Instead, it had been a moment of desperation, a moment where the line between right and wrong blurred so completely that Emily couldn't even remember what she'd hoped to achieve. She had been caught in a web so intricate, so tangled in lies and manipulation, that the person she thought she knew best, her own brother, had become a stranger in an instant. The truth, the real truth, was something she had never seen coming. The mansion, the people, the family secrets, they had all been part of something much bigger. But the deeper she dug, the less she understood. What was real? Who could she trust? Emily had learned that nothing was ever as it seemed. The photograph, the one that had changed everything, had stayed with her, buried in the back of her mind. It was the key to understanding her family's twisted history, her mother's role in the game, and the place the mansion held in it all. But even as she stared at it, as she thought about the years of secrets and betrayals, she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers she sought were never really meant for her. The mansion had been a pawn, just like her, caught in a cycle of power that stretched far beyond the walls of their home. After the final confrontation, the police had come. Investigations had been launched, and the mansion, now abandoned and decaying, was handed over to the authorities. Richard was gone, his disappearance leaving behind only whispers and rumors. Some said he had run, others that he had been taken by the people who had once controlled him. The Allens, the wealthy family who had once been their benefactors, were no longer involved. All of it, everything that had seemed so important, had unraveled, piece by piece. Yet, despite everything, the feeling of unresolved mystery lingered. The mansion was empty, but the questions remained. Emily had hoped that leaving would bring peace, that walking away would erase the scars of what she had learned. But it didn't. In fact, it was worse. With every step she took away from the mansion, she felt more alone, more uncertain about what had truly happened, and more convinced that she would never be free of the past. She had returned to the city, to the place she had once called home, but it wasn't the same. Nothing was the same. Her mother, once the rock that Emily had leaned on, was now a shadow of the woman she had known. The woman who had hidden so much from her, who had played a role in everything that had unfolded, was unreachable. The distance between them was no longer just physical, it was emotional, irreparable. Her mother had always known more than she had let on, but now, after everything that had happened, there was no going back. There was no asking her mother for answers, no hoping for explanations. The past was sealed, buried in the ruins of the mansion and the lives it had destroyed. Yet, Emily still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. That despite the resolution of the events, despite the closure that the authorities promised, something more was out there. Something dark, lingering in the background, just out of sight. It was as if the mansion itself still whispered to her, calling her back to finish what she had started, to understand the full depth of the conspiracy that had ensnared her family. She couldn't explain it, couldn't put it into words, but she felt it in her bones. And then, one night, when Emily had almost convinced herself to move on, to let go of the past, she received a letter. It was a simple envelope, white and unmarked, with no return address. Her name was written in bold, familiar handwriting, but the signature at the bottom was one she hadn't expected to see again. Richard. She opened it slowly, her hands trembling as she read the words. You've only seen the surface. The game isn't over yet. And it never will be. The letter made no sense, and yet, it made perfect sense. Richard had left her with one final message, one final twist that she couldn't ignore. The game was never over. Not for him, not for the people who had used her and her family as pawns in a much larger game. And now, Emily was caught between two worlds, the life she had tried to rebuild, and the life she had once been a part of, the one that was still pulling at her, still making her question everything. She had thought that by uncovering the truth, by confronting the conspiracy, she would find peace. But the truth, she realized, was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. There would never be a moment of total closure, no definitive ending. The mansion, the lies, the betrayal, it would always be a part of her, like a shadow following her every step. The final twist lingered in Emily's mind like a weight that she couldn't shake. Was she meant to keep searching, to uncover the rest of the story, to bring down the people who had been pulling the strings all along? Or had she already been a part of something that could never be stopped? Was there more to the conspiracy than she could ever understand? And the most terrifying question of all, was she still a player in their game? She sat back in her chair, staring out the window at the city skyline, the lights flickering in the distance, as the questions swirled in her mind. No answers, only more questions. And for the first time in a long time, Emily realized that the only thing she truly knew was this: the past never really lets go. The story had ended, but the echoes of what had happened would follow her forever. And just like that, the mansion's legacy had become a part of her own.